I met the Egyptian intellectual Nasr Hamid Abu Zayd on 2 occasions. First in Beirut, Lebanon, and then a few years later here at the University of Notre Dame, where he gave a lecture that will soon be dropped for the first time on this YouTube channel. Here in this brief talk, I'd like to introduce my friends to the person of Abu Zayd, who was declared an apostate despite his repeated affirmations that he is a faithful, believing, praying Muslim. But I'd also like to give you a couple of insights into his thought. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a very brief PowerPoint that will help me along the way. I'm going to address the question of this so-called apostasy of Nasr Hamid Abu Zayd in just a few points. I'll start with his life and then turn to the takfir, or the declaration of Abu Zayd as an apostate, or someone who has left Islam or betrayed Islam. And then finally, I'll speak a little bit about his idea of a humanistic hermeneutics of the Qur'an. So let's start with the life of Nasr Hamid Abu Zayd. He was born near Tampa, Egypt, as you see, in 1943. In his early days, he wasn't a sort of zealous reformer. In fact, he was interested in the ideas of the Muslim Brotherhood, and in particular of Sayyid Qutb, a very interesting figure who deserves his own talk, Qur'an interpreter, activist, many other things. But his thought developed, and he finished his PhD in 1981 at Cairo University, and the next year he was appointed assistant professor in the Arabic department there. Through a series of events that we'll speak about in regard to the next slide, he was declared an apostate in 1995. This involved, as we will see, the forced divorce against the will of both Abu Zayd and his wife, Dr. Ibtihal Yunus, of the two, and also a number of death threats. And so the two of them fled the country, eventually settled in Holland, but they did return rather several occasions to Egypt. In fact, he would die and be buried in Egypt. 2009, he joined us at Notre Dame for the lecture that will soon drop on this channel that has a response from the Iranian intellectual Abdul Karim Soroush. And as I mentioned, he died in Cairo, but this was after an illness that began during a visit to Indonesia. So as for the takfir, or the declaration of Abu Zayd as an apostate, this transpired after the academic case for his promotion to full professor in 1992. There were 2 votes in favor among the faculty, but 1 vote by Abdul Sabur Shaheen was against. And we'll see what transpires next. But it's interesting to note that Abdul Sabur Shaheen himself was eventually caught up in accusations of blasphemy, possible apostasy, because of a book that he wrote entitled Abi Adam, My Father Adam, in which he has a thought experiment about the possibility that the Qur'an does not deny human evolution, but that there were hominids before Adam. Actually, there's a great article on this by Suhaib Saeed, who has featured twice on exploring the Qur'an and the Bible. As for his interest in the case of Abu Zayd, he was not content just with foiling the case for Abu Zayd's promotion, but in a sermon that he gave in the Amr ibn al-As mosque, Abdul Sabur Shaheen declared that Abu Zayd was much more than a professor who didn't deserve promotion. He was also murtad, or an apostate. And I mean, there's a series of things that transpired between that time and the eventual declaration of the Cairo Court of Appeals, officially declaring Abu Zayd an apostate, that took place in 1995. As I mentioned before, that involved the nullification of his marriage to Dr. Yunus. So remember that according to traditional understanding of Islamic law, a non-Muslim man, which according to the Cairo Court of Appeals, Nasr Hamid Abu Zayd had become, cannot be married to a Muslim woman. I just pause here one moment. I said this earlier, but I think it's worth sort of doubling down on it, that Abu Zayd himself was emphatic that he was not some sort of secular or even revisionist critic of Islam, that he was a faithful Muslim who sought for the clarification of the Qur'an and Islamic thought generally for the good of Islam. The judgment itself raised several specific arguments in justification of its decision that Abu Zayd was no longer Muslim. One, that he rejected the special tax on non-Muslims in an Islamic state known as the jizya, which is mentioned in Quran chapter 9 or Surah At-Tawbah in frankly a sort of ambiguous way, but is always understood to mean a tax for Jews and Christians. It was also stated that Abu Zayd rejected the legitimacy of Muslims owning slaves. On both of those two questions, the court declared essentially that God himself has legitimized both the jizya and slave ownership. And so Abu Zayd, who after all is just a human and not God, has no right to contend with these things. That issue, that dynamic there is sort of at the heart of his project, which we'll touch on the next slide. And then the court added that there are political implications for this sort of, I don't know, impudent challenges to divine teaching, because by rejecting Islam, Abu Zayd was undermining the stability of the Egyptian state, which is based on Islam after all, and so he becomes a social danger. All that's super interesting. Won't go into it right now, maybe for another time. There were personal consequences for Abu Zayd, enormous personal consequences. Sort of the Abd Sabur Shaheen succeeded in raising all sorts of fury, not from everyone, but from many, many Egyptians against Abu Zayd, even in his hometown. According to Abu Zayd's own account, he received many death threats. I mean, maybe this is a silly anecdote and certainly doesn't do justice to the severity of the persecution that Abu Zayd went through. But years and years ago, sometime in the late 1990s, I was in Damascus in a bookstore, and I sought out a book by Abu Zayd, and I brought it to the front of the store to buy it. And the bookseller said, "You know, you really shouldn't buy this book." And I said, "No, but I want to buy this book." And he said, "No, this is a bad man and a bad book. You shouldn't buy it." He sold it to me in the end. Okay, so just sort of a final thought here to introduce a little bit of the theory of Abu Zayd, which he sometimes spoke about in English as a humanistic hermeneutic of the Qur'an. First, introduce just 3 of the many Arabic works. He wrote a few in English towards the end of his life as well, but the many Arabic works, 3 of the most influential that bear directly on Quranic studies are the concept of the text, or in Arabic, mafhum al-nas, and then the problematic of reading and the tools of interpretation, ishkaliyat al-qira'a wa aliyat al-ta'wil, and then after those, the critique of religious discourse, naqd al-khitab ad-dini. The first of these 3 books, you see the image of one of the many covers because it went through a number of editions on the right. Just to give you some insights on Abu Zayd's thought, I thought I'd just draw a few quotations on or from a later interview from Abu Zayd. This first quotation, which begins, "The text has an existence independent of interpretation and commentary. It has a history and historical context," etc. You can read the rest on your own. But I mean, his argument essentially is that the Quran, a first step towards a thoughtful understanding of the text, begins with understanding it in its historical context. And so work needs to be done to understand ways in which the words and message of the Quran responds to the historical circumstances in which it was proclaimed. And that's sort of step 1. And that helps you sort of better understand the text and advance a more rational understanding of it in one's current context. On the question of his own personal case, a trial for apostasy, and sort of the social environment in which that went down. See the second quotation there, where Abu Zayd says, referring to an earlier case of someone named Taha Hussein, who famously wrote a book about pre-Islamic poetry and was accused of apostasy. But you see that Abu Zayd writes there, Taha, as for Taha's case, he was accused of apostasy by people from outside the university, and the university defended him. In my case, in allusion to Abdul Sabur Shaheen, I was accused of apostasy inside the university, and some people from outside are defending me. Taha Hussein, he writes, was never called a kafir or infidel, unbeliever. What's most telling is how the conception of apostasy has now been transplanted into the university. Those two quotations are from this interview here from 2010, which you can find through that URL that I've put there. I just wanted to maybe, as one final bit or insight into his thought, to give you an insight into his assessment of the ideology which is sort of dominant in, according to Nasr Hamid Abu Zayd, in the Egyptian context, which basically is built on two principles, the first of which is Hakimiyat Allah, which is something like the ruling authority of God, but which necessarily is combined with a notion that the text or Nas has a fixed meaning that essentially has been established by Islamic authority. And so that fixed meaning is really which has this hakimiyya, this ruling authority. And then different Muslim intellectuals stand forward sort of, in their opinion, boldly and courageously as guardians of what they see as God's governance or God's sovereignty. But Abu Zayd would say, well, maybe what they're actually defending really is just this fixed meaning established by those who happen to wield authority in Islamic society. So a lot there, a lot to unpack. I'll be happy to see your comments about that question. Much more could be said, but let's just turn to a commentary from Abu Zayd himself. This is from not Mafhum al-Nas, but the third of the three works, and I'll give you the English translation on the following slide, the critique of religious discourse, basically where he defends robustly the place of reason in the process of understanding the Qur'an. Just read a little here. In order to discuss this concept or other concepts promoted by religious discourse and to get out of the closed circle, we will have to go back to basics and seek guidance there. The starting point is the authority of reason, the authority on which revelation itself is based, not reason as a dialectical, formal, intellectual mechanism, but as a dynamic, historical, social force. This authority, that is reason, is fallible, but equally it is able to correct its own mistakes. There's probably, you can read the rest, but there's probably something here that reflects Abu Zayd's interest in Mu'tazilism, the particular theological school that he had worked on early in his career and continued to refer back to, but it really transcends just the case of the Mu'tazila, because this idea of Abu Zayd, the classic Mu'tazilis were working 1,000 years earlier. There's a lot of Abu Zayd's thought that is in contact with the broad sweep of intellectual tradition in the Islamic world and beyond the Islamic world. And for Abu Zayd, it all circles back to reason. Okay, in the final slide, I just wanted to share with you that his work on critique of religious discourse, as you see, has been translated into English by Yale University Press, and that will be an interesting resource for those who would like to know more about the thought of Abu Zayd. Thank you so much for your patience with me. Again, this talk from Abu Zayd from the Notre Dame conference will drop here on this channel. And as mentioned, there's a response from the Iranian intellectual Abdul Karim Saroush. Thank you so much.